The eLife podcast from eLife, the open access journal for outstanding research in the life and biomedical sciences. Online at elifesciences.org.
Hello, this is episode 79 of the eLife podcast. I'm Chris Smith from The Naked Scientist. This month, evidence hunter-gatherers already had a taste for cereals before farming came along, a contagious cancer that can jump the species barrier, and the eLife Ambassador Programme, breaking down the barriers in science. We'll hear how they're getting on. And now to the process by which cancer spreads. But we're not talking about within an individual. We're talking about between individuals, so-called transmissible tumours, where cells physically move between individuals. And Alicia Bruzos at the University of Santiago de Compostela has discovered a new example of a transmissible cancer, this time among clams. But the twist here is that these tumours haven't just jumped ship from one clam to another, they've also jumped the species barrier. By using genetic sequencing, she's been able to show that cancer cells originating in a species known as striped Venus clams are now cropping up in their cousins called the warty Venus clams. And she suspects that the cancer may even be stowing away aboard ships, with obvious implications for the ecosystem.
Usually cancers start in a person or in an animal, they develop and they are able even to travel to other organs or tissues of the body, which is called metastasis. But whenever that individual or that animal die, the cancer die with it. But that is not the case of contagious cancers. So there are a few exceptions in nature, like dog cancer, Tasmanian devil cancer, and also some bivalve cancers that are able not only to spread among all the tissues of the individual, but also to jump to another individuals of the population. So that's why we call it contagious cancers.
Literally, then, a cell leaves one individual and gets into the body of another individual and carries the disease process with it, so it becomes a new cancer in that new individual.
Yeah, right.
In the case of Tasmanian devils, we are comfortable that when they fight and bite each other, they could perhaps inject cells from one animal into the other, and that could happen. In the case of dogs, it's a venereal tumour that's sexually spread. What's the bivalve, the shellfish equivalent then?
That's a very good question, and it is not answered yet, but we have some ideas of how it can happen. So these contagious cancers in bivalves are like a leukemia-like cancer. So it's a cancer that is found in the circulatory system that these animals have. So what we think it might be happening is that probably those cells are released somehow to the marine environment, maybe by death or by active spreading of the cells out of the body. And somehow these cancer cells are able to last in the marine water. And as these animals are filtering the water, by chance, they take those cancer cells that are floating in the marine environment, and those cancer cells, once they are inside the body, they start to divide and to make cancer.
The scientists that have investigated the Tasmanian devil transmissible tumours were able to show genetically that the cancer cells are quite distinct from the host they find themselves in, proving that it is the cancer that's spreading. Have you got evidence that the shellfish have done the same thing? Can you find cancer cells and show that they're genetically completely different to the host they're in, therefore they must have come part and parcel from outside?
Yeah, so the cells, when you look at them, they are already different from the healthy cells that another individuals might have. But when you go and read the DNA and study the genetics of those cells, you find out that the DNA of the cancer cells is not similar to the DNA of the healthy cells of that individual. So, yeah, we find it in the same way as with the Tasmanian devils.
Is it from the same species? Because the thing about the Tasmanian devils is it's a Tasmanian devil giving a cancer to another Tasmanian devil. When you look at the shellfish, is it the same species of shellfish giving a cancer to another shellfish of the same group?
So there are several contagious cancers described in bivalves, and in some of them, like for instance in cockles, a cockle gave rise to a cancer, and that is the cancer that is spreading among cockles. But in the case that we are talking here, the cancer was arising in a different clam, which is the striped Venus clam, and now it is currently spreading among the Guarti Venus clams. And all these striped Venus clams that we have screened have no cancer, although this cancer was originated in them.
So putting that another way then, you've got one species of clam that spawned the cancer in the first place, and it seems to have not just jumped out of them, it's jumped ship entirely, and it's got into a completely different species of clam and is causing a headache for those, or blood problem for those clams, and it's the difference in the genetics that tells you it's come from one species and into another.
Yeah, effectively.
Are you worried then that we seem to have a cancer that can transmit between species?
Yeah, that puts in the table something that we have to be careful with. I mean, if these cancers are able to spread to close related species, that poses a threat for the ecological the environment of these species.
I suppose one important vector for that happening is international trade and shipping, because we know that boats pump out water from their bilges that could contain marine life. We also know that they have clinging to their hulls various shellfish and other marine animals that they take on their journey with them. So if those animals are discharged at a remote location, yes, they could become an invasive species, but they could also discharge cancer cells that could then infect the locals.
Yeah, you're right. And what we have found in this study is that we found the same cancer in the Atlantic coast of Spain and also in the Mediterranean coast, more than 1,000 miles away. It's difficult to imagine a cancer cell floating and traveling that far. So our suspicion is that, maybe human activity would have some role.
What's the take-home message from your study then? I mean, you've confirmed that you've got a transmissible tumour that can jump the species barrier, but it is in quite a limited repertoire of animals at the moment. Are we sort of reassured or alarmed off the back of your study?
We are describing a new cancer, and if we are spreading them, we should be taking some measures to avoid that, because this could reduce the species, the quantity of species. It could bring the disease to places where it was not originally found. And all these things are not good for the environment and even for the economy of aquaculture.
Intriguing, but very concerning at the same time, isn't it? That was Alicia Bruzos. And that's it for this month. You've been listening to the eLife podcast that's produced by The Naked Scientists. Previous editions, the references and the full text transcripts for these programmes and the stories we've been covering are available, as well as details on how to subscribe to this podcast on our website at nakedscientist.com/eLife. The Naked Scientists also, incidentally, publish a weekly science programme which covers the latest leading science stories, and you can get that at nakedscientist.com/podcast. Meanwhile, I'm going to be back at the same time next month with another look inside the intriguing science that is eLife. Until then, though, from me, Chris Smith, thank you very much for listening, and goodbye.
The eLife podcast from eLife, the open access journal for outstanding research in the life and biomedical sciences. Online at elifesciences.org.